The House passing Speaker Pelosi's sweeping drug pricing legislation that would give the U.S. government more power to negotiate lower prices. The Senate is not expected to take any action on the measure. It currently has a competing bill, and President Trump said he would veto it. In a Wall Street Journal op-ed, former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb tackles the drug pricing debate taking place on Capitol Hill. He says policymakers need to resist the urge to control drug prices at the risk of punishing drug makers. Dr. Gottlieb joins us right now. He's a venture capitalist at New Enterprise Associates, whose investments include biotech companies. He's also a CNBC contributor, and you're on the board of Pfizer, correct?
That's right.
Pfizer, the drug company. Scott, this is always a difficult conversation because when people look at this, it's very obvious. We had a guest on earlier this morning who talked about patients who are found to have cancer. Something like 40% of them or something have financial troubles within the first 2 years of that diagnosis. So this is a hot-button topic. It sounds, at first blush, anybody who says you don't want higher drug prices, like you are just being mean and cruel to people who need these drugs and can't afford them. But you have a very important point to get across. What is that point?
Well, look, there's patients facing real hardships here, and I think what's happened in recent years is more people find themselves underinsured for drugs. So when you look at the actual real price of drugs, it's not increasing that much. What's happening is more and more patients are out of pocket for their drug spend, and more of their out-of-pocket spending is tied to a list price that isn't the real price that the health plans are paying. The problem is if the government steps in and sets arbitrary price controls, which is really what this House bill does, the government starts to pick winners and losers and reallocates capital, and it's not going to necessarily reallocate the capital into the highest use endeavors. And my fear is that what this bill is going to do, by raising the cost of capital and capping expected returns, is effectively reduce risk-taking. So you're still going to get new drugs, but you're going to get investments in known targets and platforms that are well-developed, and the sort of high-risk stuff like gene therapy and cell-based regenerative medicine that really hold a lot of promise for the future. That's what's not going to get created.
So let's talk about those targets that we already are aware of, things that already have plenty of drugs that are out there for treating. Would be what? What sort of diseases are we talking about?
Things like cardiovascular disease, parts of the body, organ systems that we really understand the biology well. Those are targets that are well validated. Places in the body where we don't understand the targets really well are brain diseases like neurodegenerative diseases and certain kinds of cancers. That's where you've seen investment shift. You've seen the biopharmaceutical industry shift investment into the highest risk endeavors, in part because the returns were there.
Over the last 15 years.
Right. 15 years ago, the refrain about the drug industry was all they do is make Me Too products. All they do is make a fifth version of a statin or a blood pressure pill. So we took deliberate policy steps, and I was there when we did it, with how we designed Medicare Part D and the Medicare Modernization Act to try to shift incentives into higher risk endeavors. And that's what the companies did. You've seen the companies shed their OTC businesses, their animal health businesses, their generic drug businesses, and they moved all their investment, or a lot of it, into the high growth, high risk parts of the industry.
As a result, what sort of developments have we seen for these rare diseases where there was no hope before?
Well, look, gene editing, gene therapy, where we really have the ability to cure inherited disorders. Sickle cell disease, we'll have a cure of a sickle cell disease in the next 5 years. The other thing to remember is that these new platforms like gene therapy, they're being used right now against rare diseases. But once they get perfected and mainstreamed, we're going to start using these same platforms against more common diseases, like maybe to cure the effects of a heart attack. You think back to antibody-based drugs, you look back 20 years ago, those drugs were targeted towards rare cancers. Now we have antibody-based drugs for things like the treatment of asthma or common diseases like that, or cholesterol, lowering cholesterol. So these platforms get perfected in high-risk areas, and then they get mainstreamed. My fear is you're not going to get investment in these kinds of platforms. You'll get investment in things that are, again, known platforms, small molecule drugs, the kind of drugs you swallow, and in well-validated targets. We'll still get new drugs. We might even get more drugs, but we're not going to get drugs targeted to really high-risk endeavors.
Where does it stand right now with this bill passing the House? President has said he'll veto it. There's an alternative bill that's moving its way through the Senate. Is it really having any chilling effect yet, or what would need to happen before you think that that actually plays out?
Yeah, the alternative bill is a good piece of legislation, aggressively widened bill. There's parts of it I think that could be modified and made better, but that bill doesn't solve the drug pricing problem, if you will, the out-of-pocket problem for a lot of Americans. It's going to solve that problem for senior citizens, and it modernizes Medicare Part D, which is long overdue. So it's an important piece of legislation. The House bill doesn't help a lot of consumers either. It's really not going to solve people's problems every day.
What will solve the problems on an everyday basis? If this is that insurance companies are no longer paying for these things and people are dealing with these list prices that aren't the real prices that insurance companies pay, how do you fix that?
Well, there is a provision in the bill that passed the Senate just recently, or is a compromise that is said to be broken between the Senate and the House, that would mandate that the discounts, the rebates, need to be passed on to consumers. So that would be helpful. And I think looking at the structure of health insurance, we've really started to hollow out health insurance in recent years. And I think a lot of this was set in motion by the Affordable Care Act, where more patients find themselves on closed formularies where they're completely uncovered for certain drugs and their out-of-pocket costs are very high. So they find themselves underinsured for drugs. It's not that the drug prices have gone up significantly in recent years. They haven't.
Stop paying for it.
Insurance companies
as a result of the Affordable Care Act?
Well, the Affordable Care Act was a compromise between trying to extend coverage to more people with coverage that was skinnier. So I think the ACA popularized, for example, the use of closed formularies. A closed formulary means there's a formulary list, and it's a narrow list of drugs that are covered, but drugs that don't make that list, you're completely uncovered for.
Which, again, goes back to a lot of the rarer diseases and other issues that are not popular, like if you're not using Lipitor or something. Maybe it's not on the list.
Well, Lipitor, there's good enough generics. I mean, for a lot of these common maladies, you now have good enough generics.
Personalized medicine is going to be expensive.
It is, but it leads to cure.
I know, and it might not be chronic. You might not be in a hospital with drugs, so we better not hurt the drug industry too much, because it's better than going into a hospital.
A gene therapy drug, a single patient in a clinical trial for a gene therapy drug, I did my own informal survey, cost between $500,000 to $700,000 just to run the clinical trial. One patient.
That's cheaper than
And for gene editing, enrolling a single patient in gene editing trial is $1 million.
Yes,
so
but the difference is you are finding platforms that then can be rolled out to multiple patients, and then you can take and find multiple diseases that get wiped out from that. You're not talking about a one-off drug. You're talking about an event of one that eventually leads to a platform.
But if you want to grandstand it in Congress and talk about how the drug companies are gouging people, you're going to use the $500,000 to $700,000.
Well, that's not what it costs the patient. That's what it costs.
No, I know, but you're going to use. I mean, this is.
But the alternative is don't solve these.
I understand, but talk to the people that want to stifle innovation.